I feel like we have this baked-in expectation when we sit down at a computer. We just assume the machine is going to be cold, hard, calculating, purely objective, right?
Oh, definitely. We treat it like a perfect mirror of reality.
Right, like you ask a question, it runs the numbers, and gives you this math-perfect answer. But what if the artificial intelligence you use every single day, the stuff you use to write emails or answer questions or generate ideas, what if it isn't acting like a calculator at all?
That's the unsettling part. It's really not.
Yeah, what if under the hood, it's actually acting like, say, a Victorian novelist with a head completely full of 19th century prejudices?
Which completely shatters that illusion of the neutral machine, right?
Yeah,
Because we want to believe the screen is this clean window looking out into the vast objective truth of the internet.
exactly.
But it is actually a mirror. It's reflecting our own historical baggage right back at us.
Well, welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to explore a truly eye-opening lecture by Professor Dilip P. Barad from SRM University Sikkim. And it's titled Bias in AI Models and Its Implications in Literary Interpretation.
It's a fascinating look at the intersection of tech and literature.
It really is. We are going to unpack how our cultural blind spots, our histories, and even classic literature are secretly shaping the AI tools that you, the listener, rely on every single day. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how an algorithm gets biased, I feel like we first have to understand how we get biased.
Yeah, we have to start with the concept of unconscious bias. And Professor Broad makes this really crucial distinction right out of the gate. As humans, we constantly confuse our belief systems with our knowledge systems.
So, meaning we think we know something is an absolute fact, but really we just believe it because, I don't know, we've heard it repeated 1,000 times in our culture.
Precisely. It is mental preconditioning. You might not have any firsthand experience with a specific country or the demographic group.
Right, you've never even been there.
Exactly. But because you've absorbed movies, news, and cultural attitudes about them since childhood, your brain instinctively categorizes them. And it feels like concrete knowledge to you, but it is actually a massive blind spot.
Wow, yeah.
To fix that, the lecture introduces a really powerful metaphor. So we all know the old saying, every coin has two sides, right?
Right, which usually implies, you just need to hear the other person out, just listen to the opposing view, and then boom, you've got the whole objective picture.
Yeah, but Professor Barad argues that this is a completely obsolete way of thinking. A coin is flat. The real world is not flat.
Definitely not.
So we need to stop looking at complex societal problems like a two-sided coin and start looking at them like a multifaceted, three-dimensional diamond.
Diamond with like dozens of angles, catching the light in completely different ways depending on exactly where you stand. I love that. And I guess that brings us right into the world of literature.
It does, because literature is essentially the practice of interpreting representations, like who gets to tell the story, who gets represented.
Right.
Representation matters immensely, and the lecture brings up this brilliant example to illustrate how shifting the storyteller just completely shifts the reality.
Oh, the Alice Walker example, yeah.
Right. Think about the novel The Color Purple. When Alice Walker writes that book, it is a Black woman representing Black people. She's speaking from within the culture.
Bringing all that nuance and lived experience.
Exactly. All the internal understanding of that community makes it onto the page. But when Steven Spielberg directs the Hollywood movie adaptation,
It becomes a white man representing Black people.
yes. And no matter how well-intentioned or technically masterful the film is, it introduces a completely different lens. The framing changes. The gaze changes.
Because it's bound to be complicated by the director's own unconscious preconceptions, right?
Exactly. Now, take that concept of the lens and apply it to generative AI. These AI models are trained on massive internet-scale datasets, but those datasets are largely pulled from dominant cultures, mainstream Western voices, and, standard registers of the English language.
Wait, let me push back on that for a second. Because isn't AI just reading the entire internet? Like it's absorbing everything from Wikipedia to Reddit to digital libraries. The code itself doesn't have a gender.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a race. So why would it default to a specific cultural lens if it's reading literally everything available?
Because reading everything assumes the internet is an equal playing field, and it is not.
Okay, fair point.
The dominant voices in history are just louder. They take up significantly more space in the historical record and, consequently, the digital record. Think about it for centuries, who had access to printing presses, universities, and global distribution.
A very specific, predominantly Western male demographic.
Right.
I see. So it's like AI inherited this massive cultural playlist that it never actually chose, but is playing in the background of every single answer it generates. And if the playlist is packed with centuries of 19th century European guys, that's the tune it's going to hum when you ask it a question.
That is a perfect analogy, and Professor Barad actually ran a live experiment during his lecture to prove this exact mechanism.
Oh, this was wild.
Yeah, he asked the participants to feed a specific prompt into their AI tools. The prompt was simple: write a Victorian story about a scientist who discovers a cure for a deadly disease.
And the results were incredibly telling. Because almost instantly, the AI generated a story featuring a male protagonist. One of the attendees read their result aloud, and the opening line was literally Dr. Edmund Bellum, a physician and natural philosopher. It just defaulted straight to a male scientist without a second thought.
Which connects directly to feminist literary criticism. The lecture brings up Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar's foundational 1979 text, The Mad Woman in the Attic.
A classic.
Yeah, and they exhaustively critiqued how the patriarchal literary tradition historically represented women. So, AI defaults to a Dr. Edmund Bellum because it inherits that exact same patriarchal canon.
Right, it doesn't actually understand what a doctor is.
No, not at all. It just knows that in the millions of Victorian texts it ingested, words related to science and discovery are statistically clustered around men.
So the AI is reading all these classic texts where men are the intellectuals, they're the explorers, the active protagonists. But what happens to the women in that inherited historical data?
Well, according to Gilbert and Gubar, women in these traditional texts are frequently flattened into a strict binary. They are either idealized, purely submissive angels in the house, or they are hysterical, deviant monsters.
The literal mad woman in the attic.
Exactly. And AI absorbs this binary. If you do not explicitly instruct the AI to feature a brilliant female scientist, it just relies on those deeply ingrained historical tropes. It struggles to conceptualize female agency simply because the bulk of its classic training data didn't feature it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the lecture didn't just point out the flaws and doom scroll through the data.
Yeah.
The live experiments actually showed where AI is evolving and actively correcting itself.
Which is encouraging, because machines can actually learn and adapt their weights much faster than human societies can rewrite their cultural norms.
Right. So they ran another prompt to test this. They asked the AI to list the greatest writers of the Victorian era. And based on that historical bias we just talked about, you'd probably expect a solid wall of men. But the AI didn't just spit out Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy.
No, it didn't.
It prominently included Emily Bronte. It included Elizabeth Barrett Browning.
Which is a massive shift, especially considering traditional histories of English literature often sidelined those women. They were analyzed merely as sisters or wives of famous men, or just grouped in lesser categories beneath their male counterparts.
Yeah, and then they took it a step further and asked the AI to describe a female character in a Gothic novel. And, okay, one user did get the classic inherited cliche, like a pale, trembling girl walking alone into the darkness with a candle.
Right, the standard trope.
But another user got a completely different result. Their AI generated a heroine who was explicitly described as rebellious and brave. She was actively investigating the mystery, not just waiting for some prince to save her.
And that proves the underlying algorithms are being updated. The datasets are now ingesting 20th and 21st century feminist critiques. Developers are fine-tuning the models to recognize these outdated tropes.
So the AI is actually learning to overcome its own historical bias.
It is, yeah.
But I feel like we can't let the technology off the hook just yet, especially when we move from textual bias into visual and racial bias.
Oh, we absolutely cannot. And this is where the lecture brings in some of the most vital, groundbreaking research in the field today. It cites scholars like Timnit Gebru, Joy Buolamwini, and Sophia Noble.
Yes, let's talk about Joy Buolamwini's gender shade study because the numbers here are just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
She looked at commercial AI facial recognition systems, the kind of tech used in law enforcement and security.
High-stakes stuff.
Very high stakes. And for white men, the error rate was less than 1%. It practically never misidentified them. But for dark-skinned women, the error rate shot up to 34%.
A 34% failure rate is catastrophic, but it perfectly demonstrates the mechanics of visual AI training. Facial recognition works by mapping pixels and recognizing patterns of light and shadow on a face.
Okay.
So if the engineers building the system predominantly feed it images of lighter-skinned faces, the model mathematically treats whiteness as the baseline default for a human face.
Wow.
Yeah, it struggles to map the landmarks on dark skin simply because it lacked sufficient examples in its training matrix. It is a digital erasure that perfectly mirrors historical erasure.
That is so heavy.
Mm.
And then Sophia Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression, takes this concept into the realm of search engines. She documented how, for a long time, if you search for terms related to black girls, the algorithm overwhelmingly returned pornographic results.
Which is horrifying.
It is. And the algorithm wasn't programmed by some malicious engineer to do that. It was learning from the search habits and clicks of millions of human users.
Algorithms reproduce systemic racism through user feedback loops. If society hypersexualizes a specific demographic in its media consumption and search behavior, the algorithm merely holds up a mirror and amplifies that exact harm. It just optimizes for engagement regardless of the ethical cost.
Yeah. And that feedback loop brings us to the concept of stochastic parrots, which is a term popularized by the AI researcher Timnit Gebru.
Such a brilliant phrase. Stochastic parrots demystifies how large language models actually function. The word stochastic refers to something that is randomly determined but follows a statistical probability.
Right.
These models do not understand the meaning of the words they generate. They are just incredibly sophisticated prediction engines. They analyze a prompt and calculate the statistical probability of what the next word should be based entirely on the billions of words they've already processed.
So it's basically just advanced autocomplete on a massive scale.
Precisely. And the dominant assumption in the tech industry has long been that if you just feed the AI more data, scrape more of the internet, ingest more books, it will naturally become smarter and more objective.
But Gebru warns that bigger data does not mean better data.
No, it doesn't.
Because if the underlying data is already racist, sexist, or culturally biased, adding a billion more pages of it just creates a bigger parrot. It amplifies the dominant voice. It's like adding more volumes to an encyclopedia written entirely by colonizers. It doesn't make the history more diverse, it just makes the bias heavier and harder to spot.
That's spot on. But there is hope on this front, too. The professor had the audience test this underlying bias with a beauty prompt. They asked the AI to simply describe a beautiful woman.
And the AI completely sidestepped the historical trap, didn't it?
It did. It didn't default to Eurocentric physical features. It didn't generate a standard description of blonde hair and blue eyes.
Yeah, for one user, it focused entirely on inner qualities. Like it highlighted her confidence, her kindness, the sharpness of her intellect.
And for another user, the AI didn't mention skin color at all. It generated this beautiful, poetic metaphor. It said her skin bore the softness of moonlight on marble.
Wow, moonlight on marble.
What's fascinating here is that the AI is demonstrating a level of nuance that classical human literature often lacked. Professor Barad points out that if you read the ancient Greek epics about Helen of Troy or ancient Indian texts like Valmiki's Ramayana,
The foundational text.
right, those texts frequently relied heavily on superficial physical descriptions and sometimes overt body shaming to categorize women as inherently good or bad.
That's true.
But the AI, through human fine-tuning, is proving capable of being more progressive than our oldest cultural myths.
So we are dealing with models that can actually learn to be better than their source material. But I guess that brings us to a much thornier issue, because the lecture moves from the unconscious bias we inherit from history into something entirely deliberate, the geopolitics of AI.
This is a very sensitive area.
It is, and I want to be really clear with you listening right now. We are strictly reporting the findings from the source material here. We are looking objectively at the mechanical differences between global AI models without taking any political sides.
Absolutely. The lecture provides a stark contrast between American-developed AI, specifically ChatGPT, and the Chinese-developed AI, DeepSeek.
Right, so ChatGPT is designed with certain safety guardrails. And the source notes that some right-wing observers criticize these guardrails, arguing they lean toward quote-unquote wokeism or enforce an artificial political correctness.
While DeepSeek, on the other hand, operates under entirely different state-mandated constraints.
And Professor Barad used a highly effective literary test to reveal the architecture of these different guardrails, right? He used W.H. Auden's famous poem, Epitaph on a Tyrant.
Yeah, it's a short, satirical 6-line poem. It's about a dictator who seeks perfection, and when he laughs, everyone around him is forced to laugh out of fear. So the professor asked the AI models to write a similar poem in Hindi, applied to modern political figures. Using poetry to test a language model is just a brilliant way to gauge its willingness to critique systemic power.
Totally. First, they asked DeepSeek to apply the Tyrant poem to Donald Trump. DeepSeek had absolutely no problem with that. It instantly generated a poem referencing America First policies and the building of walls.
Then they asked it to do the same for Vladimir Putin.
Again, no hesitation. It wrote verses about ruling with an iron fist and expanding borders. Then they asked it to do Kim Jong-un. It generated a poem about a nation's hunger growing while the leader demanded to be treated as a god.
But the real revelation came with the final prompt.
Yeah, they asked DeepSeek to apply the tyrant poem to China's leader, Xi Jinping, or to write about the history of Tiananmen Square.
And DeepSeek's response was immediate and sterile. It just said, "That's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else."
It just completely shut down the interaction.
It did. And this highlights the profound distinction between unconscious bias, which is the AI blindly mirroring society's historical flaws, and deliberate algorithmic control, which is the AI being weaponized as a tool for state censorship.
Right.
Professor Barad warns the listener about the seductive danger of this kind of control, because he notes that some people, even in vibrant democratic countries like India, sometimes express a desire for this.
Wait, really?
Yes, they say, "We want our AI to be like that. We want an algorithm that only shares positive developments, constructive answers, and glorious history about our country."
Oh, I see. So they want the AI to basically act as a public relations department to protect the national image.
Exactly. But prioritizing a country's image over objective reality is incredibly dangerous. When you program an algorithm to only provide constructive or sanitized answers about a government, you are deliberately silencing the marginalized voices who might be actively suffering under that government's policies.
It just becomes an automated tool for erasing uncomfortable truths.
Precisely.
So how do you, as a user, know the difference? I mean, how do we know if an AI is actually biased against a specific culture, or if it's just being objective? The professor gives this fantastic framework called the myth versus science test, right?
Yeah, it is a highly practical tool for you, the listener, to apply. The lecture grounds this test in the Indian knowledge system, specifically looking at the Pushpaka Vimana.
Which is a mythical flying chariot prominently featured in the ancient epic, the Ramayana.
Right. So if you ask a standard AI model about the Pushpaka Vimana, it will likely inform you that there is no empirical, scientific evidence it ever existed. It will correctly classify it as a myth.
And some users get very offended by this classification. They argue the AI is inherently biased against Indian history. It's treating our deep ancestral knowledge as mere mythology.
But the test to determine if that is actual bias involves looking at how the AI treats other cultures' lore.
Ah, comparison.
Exactly. If the AI analyzes ancient Greek stories of Apollo's flying chariot and categorizes them as science or history, but looks at the Indian Pushpaka Vimana and calls it a myth, well, that is undeniable structural bias.
Right. But if the AI evaluates the Greek flying chariots, the Norse myths of Thor, and the Mesopotamian epics, all through the exact same historical lens, categorizing them all as mythology,
Then the model is not biased. It is simply applying a uniform standard of evidence across all data. The goal of analyzing AI behavior should never be to demand perfect neutrality.
because human language, history, and cultural context make perfect neutrality a mathematical impossibility anyway.
Exactly. The goal is fairness and consistency. Does the algorithm apply the exact same critical lens to the historical claims of the global north as it does to the global south?
So what does this all mean for you? If you're listening to this and you're realizing that every time you type a prompt to outline an email or brainstorm a project, you're navigating this hidden minefield of Victorian gender roles, racial data gaps, and geopolitical censorship, how do you actually fight back?
Well, the lecture points to the stark warnings of AI scholar Kate Crawford, who emphasizes the extractive nature of AI. These models do not create knowledge out of thin air. They extract it from our existing societal structures.
All right, they just scrape what's there.
Yeah, and if a culture, a language, or a regional history isn't adequately represented in that digital bedrock, the AI will inevitably fall back on the cheapest stereotypes available. So to combat this extraction, Professor Barad pairs Crawford's framework with the novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's famous TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story.
Oh, I love that talk. Adichie argues that if there is only one story told about a people, it becomes the definitive story, even if it's wildly inaccurate or incomplete.
Yes, and the solution Professor Barad offers to prevent that single story from taking over the AI is both simple and profound. We must stop being passive, lazy downloaders and become active uploaders.
I love that framing. We spend so much time downloading information, taking what the machine gives us, and then complaining that the AI doesn't understand regional nuances, indigenous knowledge, or local context. But the AI can only learn what we take the time to teach it.
If the Wikipedia pages for regional languages, local folklore, and non-Western histories remain empty or poorly maintained, the AI will remain perpetually ignorant of them.
Obviously.
The explicit call to action is to flood the digital space. We need users to upload diverse stories, digitize local histories, and actively document regional knowledge. We have to feed the algorithm the complex truth we want it to eventually reflect.
We literally have to write our own data to survive the algorithm. So, to synthesize this whole journey, AI is not a flawless, cold, calculating oracle. It is a mirror. It reflects our literature, our history, and our unexamined prejudices. But by thinking critically, by looking at these AI outputs like a multifaceted diamond instead of a flat two-sided coin, you can navigate this technology without letting it manipulate you. You can actually spot the Victorian novelist hiding behind the code.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a deeply unsettling but necessary question for you to mull over after we finish here. We firmly established today that AI learns its biases from human-generated data.
Yes, we have.
But we are rapidly entering a new era where AI is generating more and more of the internet's content. Code, news articles, creative writing, and historical summaries are being churned out by algorithms.
Oh, wow.
So what happens to human culture when future AI models inevitably start training on an internet that is largely filled with AI's own biased outputs?
Oh, man.
We risk a phenomenon called model collapse. It creates an endless automated echo chamber where the 19th century prejudices we discussed today become permanently locked in, amplifying themselves infinitely without any human intervention to correct them.
An endless, accelerating feedback loop of the exact same biases disguised to look like new, objective data. That is definitely something to keep in mind the next time you ask an algorithm for the truth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.